at today's work session. We will start with proposed budget documents. Sadia?
Yes, good afternoon, Mayor and City Council members. Just a quick reminder to all those that are watching, as well as our, residents here, that we do have all proposed budget documents online on our budget website. But what we're here today is to discuss our budget notes. As a reminder to City Council, we received 2 budget notes as part of the fiscal year 25 budget process. The first involved funding for Oak City Cares. We're happy to report that through some strategic alignment in our current proposed budget, we were able to make that extra funding happen. What we also received was a combined budget notes from Council Members Patton and Council Member Fort, and that had to do with separation allowance. Council Member Patton, you asked us to look into separation allowance for both public safety members, exclusively fire and the ECC, and then Council Member Fort asked us to look into separation allowance for the city's operational departments. So today, myself and our CFO, Allison Bradshaw from the Finance Department, have a comprehensive presentation talking about the separation allowance that both Council Members Patton and Council Members Fort asked for. So with that, I will pass off the mic to Allison Bradshaw. Thank you.
So good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Allison Bradshaw with the Finance Department. So as Sadia just said, I'll be presenting information on the 2 budget notes for separation allowance. So here's the agenda. I'll review the budget notes as requested by Councilmember Patton and Councilmember Fort, discuss what a separation allowance is and show an example calculation. I'll speak to the city's funding strategy for its existing separation allowance, take a few minutes to talk about long-term liabilities and what it means to the city's financial picture and its credit rating. I'll show an estimate of the annual cost of the cash payments over a 10-year horizon based on our assumptions, which would be paid out to retirees, and then I'll conclude with a few policy considerations for Council. All right, so the budget note was to provide an estimate of the impact of a separation allowance. Budget note A was for public safety, specifically for Raleigh Fire and emergency communications staff. Budget note B was for the operational departments, which are Raleigh Water, Solid Waste, Engineering Services, Transportation, Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources staff. And the same assumptions were used for budget notes A and B. So just to level set and provide an understanding of the separation allowance today, this chart describes the separation allowance, which is based on state statute and applies to our sworn law enforcement officers. The state statute for separation allowance includes a benefit that allows full retirement at age 55 with 5 years of credible service or 30 years at any age. There is a difference when compared to general employees who must reach 25 years at age 60 and 30 years at any age. A change to this rule would require approval by the General Assembly. A separation allowance is a monthly benefit payment which is paid in addition to an employee's retirement benefit as part of the local government employees' retirement pension plan, which we call ledgers. This allowance, unlike the ledger's pension, ends at age 62. There is a formula by which the monthly benefit is calculated, and that formula is an employee's final base salary multiplied by the number of credible years of service multiplied by a factor of 0.85%. This benefit payment is handled and processed by the City of Raleigh, unlike the ledger's pension payments, which are managed by the State Treasurer's Office. So here's an example of the calculation. If you look at the white box to the left of the chart, this employee was making $80,000 when they retired from the city and had 30 years of credible service. The factor of 0.85% is then applied. In this case, the yearly amount of the benefit is $20,400 or $1,700 a month. To illustrate the cost of a program for one employee, I then took the full amount, which would be paid over 11 years from age 51 to 62 in this case, when the program would end. And this one employee had a cost to the city of just over $224,000. So how does the city fund a liability, in this case, the separation allowance? Annually, there are two components which are part of the budget. The first piece is the required cash payments needed to pay the retirees in the program. This is, of course, an extremely important piece as these payments are processed monthly. The second piece of the budget is to set aside funding for employees in the program that have not yet retired. This is to annually allocate a portion of the total amount expected to be paid in the future for each employee. This funding strategy allows the cost of the program to be supported in an equitable way over an employee's career. To support the annual budget, the city receives an actuarial report which provides information as to the long-term costs of the program and required funding to support it. Information about the program is reported in the ACFR, and this information is an important component of the city's debt burden and is reviewed by credit rating agency when the city receives its credit score. So why is a liability important? As I mentioned, there are two parts of the funding of the separation allowance. The annual cash payment is one element, and the second element is the future costs and commitment to employees who have not yet retired. The program is a promise to pay in the future. It's very similar to one's home mortgage or car loan. The city, as good fiscal stewards through the budget process and the actuarial analysis, set aside funding on an annual basis for the future. If you look at the white chart on the left side of the page, you will see the FY25 proposed general fund budget of $732 million. The annual contribution to the law enforcement separation allowance is proposed at $8.1 million. This represents a little over 1% of the annual budget. When you look at the city's liability for the program, which is almost $63 million, it's about 9% of the budget, and it covers approximately 840 employees in the police department. The balance of $63 million is considered a liability and counts towards the city's debt burden. A large debt burden, just like in our own personal finances, may negatively impact a credit score. The city just completed a credit review for our upcoming bond sale later this month. I shared a summary of that in the manager's update week before last, and we confirmed the city's AAA standing. The quotes to the left of the chart are from the 3 credit rating agencies and are describing the city's current debt burden. These agencies believe the city's current debt liability is in the moderate to slightly elevated range. Debt management and ratios are important criteria and matter when the credit rating agency reviews the city's financials. Maintaining the city's stellar AAA rating is an important component to solid fiscal health and stewardship. This chart shows one piece of the expected cost of a separation for public safety, which is defined as Raleigh Fire and Emergency Communications, and for the operating departments, which are Raleigh Water, Solid Waste, Engineering Services, Transportation, Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources. If you look to the left of the chart and down the page, you will see a 10-year horizon. The next column shows the number of employees eligible during the first year. In the case of fire and ECC, 32 employees would be eligible at some point in FY25. The estimated cost of the program in year 1 is $1 million. In the next column, you will see a $sign with a plus sign. This represents the funding allocation needed for current employees who would not yet be able to retire. This information would come from an actuarial report. The following year, there would be a total of 47 retirees in the program, and the estimated cost would be $1.9 million. I provided a 10-year horizon for the cost of the program, and you can see it's estimated to be close to $45 million in cash payments made to retirees. You would then need to add in the actuarial funding recommendations to help support the long-term liability. In our analysis for fire and ECC, we believe at the beginning we would have a total of approximately 701 staff that would be eligible based on today's employee count. The second budget note provides the same estimates for the operating departments. The same assumptions apply, and the chart information is in the same format. Year one, 30 employees would be eligible for the separation at a cost of $700,000, and the estimate over the 10-year horizon is almost $33 million. And like the fire and ECC, the cost of the actuarial funding would be incremental. In our analysis for operating departments, we believe that approximately 1,894 staff would be eligible to participate in the program based on today's employee count. The two programs total over $77 million over a 10-year horizon. And again, this is the only estimate for those cash payments that would be required to be made for retirees, not the annual requirement that would be required as a part of the budget. So based on the employee count for fire and ECC, which is slightly less than police, and the operating employee count, which is almost 2 times that of the police department, staff believes that the liabilities to support these proposed programs would be significant. Every budget contains policy decisions, and highlighted on the chart are a few considerations relating to separation allowance. A new liability invites credit scrutiny and may pose a threat to the city's outstanding credit rating. There would be inequities in the city, and I do understand that there are inequities today with the police separation. However, the city and other state and local jurisdictions are required to offer this pay by law. The General Assembly, on more than one occasion, has not supported a fire separation allowance, and a separation allowance may create scrutiny by the state and other local jurisdictions around affordability. I would like to conclude by mentioning that the city in the FY25 budget and with the advancement of the comp and class study will continue to review pay and benefits for all city employees. And Mayor, with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'll turn it back to you.
Okay. Do we have any questions for Allison? Councilmember Jones and then Patton.
Thank you so much for the report. I do want to stay, because we focus right now on the credit rating scrutiny. As I was looking through the budget, I highlighted a section on page 340 where we talk about the state statute and that we have a legal 8% taxing authority, and right now we are at 1.8%. I just want to make sure that I read that correctly, that there is that leaves us with what you wrote on page 340, $6.3 billion before we would begin to go down. Or is that right? And am I reading it right, or is that wrong?
So you're definitely reading that correctly. And yes, that by state statute is allowable for all entities. The way the credit rating agencies look at that, though, there will be no way we would get to 8% without having a downgrade of our credit. So they don't really look at what we can do, they look at what we are doing relative to our budget.
Okay, understood. The actuary report that you also mentioned is something that we did not do, correct?
That's correct.
And that is something that was mentioned to us, but is that something, how much does that cost to do, and why was it too expensive for us to do?
So we looked at how much our OPEB report cost, because again, this would really be all encompassing, and I'm pretty sure that amount is over $20,000, and at least for an initial separation allowance, my estimate would take several months to complete. Then on an ongoing basis, I don't believe the cost would be that high, but that is really what we looked at as a comparison. And no, the city did not spend that money to get an actuarial report.
And on an ongoing, are you saying that we'd have to hire an actuary? We couldn't just contract for like one question like this? It would have to be somebody that's on staff at all times?
So we receive actuarial reports annually because we need them for the ACFR and we need them for our funding. So we actually get one for our OPEB as well as our LEO separation.
Can you please remind me what OPEB stands for? I'm sorry.
Yeah, those are our post-employee retirement health care benefits.
Got it. Okay. All right. And then does this have to be fully funded on day one, or can this be ramped up? Like, was the police fully funded in 1987 when it was brought on, or is this something that over time got to where we are right now?
Yeah, this does not need to be fully funded, just as the police $63 million liability today is not fully funded. The key here is we would absolutely want to fund it with two components. A, what we have to write checks for, right? I mean, employees would expect that piece. But then B, we need to start having that liability come down. And so that second piece that I talked about that would come is really when an employee starts at the City of Raleigh and is in this program and eventually is going to retire, we want to be setting aside funding a little bit annually, right? So when that employee ideally gets to that place, we really sort of have the funding in the bank. Now, to be honest, that's never really going to happen, right? Because actuarials are estimates and estimates change. That could be salary assumptions. That could be our resources could increase, decrease. Our investments and how much return we make on that money could change as well. So the actuarials are a point in time. And when you look, just a matter of a couple of years ago, our Leo liability was around $40 million, and it's now $63 million. So this is different than like saving for a kid that goes to college, that eventually goes to college and you're done paying. You know, this is for every employee that we hire from here on out, including the employees that work for the city today.
And then my last question, as you just mentioned a few years ago, Leo's wasn't fully funded. It was at 44 million, now we're at 63 million. Did that affect our credit score? Is it something that they look at ongoing to see that we're at this fully capable state, or is that something that is okay to be in flux?
Yeah, so the credit rating agencies look at everything on an annual basis, but they also look at it compared to our traditional debt as well. And so just the 63 million is not fully funded. So I really want to maybe stress that point. We do not have $63 million sitting in the bank in order to pay this liability. We are setting aside money on an annual basis to try to get there. The key here is, I believe, and you can look back in time, that liability is going to increase over time. So it's almost like we never catch up, if you will. Because again, it's like that kid that goes to college. Eventually those bills end. This bill will never end, right? Because it's for every person that hired into the city from here on.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Councilmember Patton?
Yeah. Hi, Allison. Thanks for this. Couple questions. This is a good slide to be on. So this is, I'm curious if this includes people, this 10-year outlook includes people who will roll off, and also if you forecasted it out any further, because the window of time people would be eligible is like roughly 10 years-ish. So I would wonder if we forecasted it out even further, would these numbers go down or level off as older folks are rolling off and newer folks are coming on?
Yeah, great question. And I will say, and I'm sorry the little menu there is blocking the numbers. I don't know how to get that piece off, but yeah, we only took the snapshot of today. So while we did have folks that would eventually roll off, meaning they would hit age 62, we haven't added any new people into these numbers. So arguably, these numbers are very understated, but I didn't have a way. It's not as if 10 people roll off and 10 people roll on. That's sort of not the way the dynamics work. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, for sure. And then if you were to have presented us with the same type of chart for law enforcement as it exists today, that third column, the future payment, like can you kind of describe what the proportion is of the current payouts and how much is being allocated toward future?
Yeah, these will be round numbers, and I may have to turn around to my staff in the audience. But of the 8.1 million, I would say almost 5 million is for current cash payments, and the rest would be set-asides. Yep, that's about right.
Getting a thumbs
Yeah.
up. Okay. So it's reasonable to assume that proportion would be similar
Possibly, and I'm certainly not an actuary, but for the police department, because this law was enacted, I think back in the late '80s. Somebody can correct me on that, but this has been a known liability for a long time. So arguably, we've been already saving for people that have been with the department. If we were to initiate something new today for either fire and ECC and operating, we haven't saved anything. So arguably, one might suggest that it actually could be larger because we're going to have, people that are going to be retiring pretty quickly that the city has not set any funding aside for.
Okay. So is a human scale comparison like when you first get into a mortgage, almost all of your monthly payment is going toward your interest, and then as you progress through the mortgage, more and more of it's going toward your principal?
Essentially, but there again, with a mortgage, it eventually ends. This just, unless council was to, take the benefit away, it would never end. So I feel like that's the difference, even when we try to sort of compare it to the kid going to college or the mortgage or the car loan, those do have a sunset date when you've paid everything off. Arguably, you don't pay this off.
And can you describe for us scenarios where perhaps in other municipalities where pension benefits what could happen that might cause this liability to sort of implode upon itself or like become too burdensome? Would something like the Great Recession cause this to be something we could no longer support, or what would happen? Flash forward to a bad time.
Sure. I'll take a stab, and then I might look for the city manager to help. But if you think about it from an annual funding basis, when you're in an environment like a recession, and your revenues might be lower than you anticipated, or you really have to tighten your belt. Arguably, this is something you don't tighten your belt on, right? Because you need that allocation and that funding to be there, because this is a promise to pay. And so I think in a scenario like that, that is where things could get very stressed because your debt burden is high compared to what you would be bringing in. I think that answered the question, but
yes, I think you did a really nice job. I think just to follow up to one of the previous questions and concerns is it doesn't necessarily trail off like that personal debt that we have in our private lives simply because salaries will continue to go up. So the obligation of the long-term debt based on the salaries at the point of retirement will continue to trickle up. So those numbers aren't going to go down. I would argue that they're going to go up because at least for the past 10, 12 years, there's been a commitment from this organization that employees get a pay increase. So right now, it's real-time data based on the percentages and where we are currently in pay administration. It doesn't take into account future growth. Additionally, with that too, these numbers are accurate counts for today with all of the annexations that have been approved at this table over the last 18 months. We are going to have to expand the scope of the Raleigh Fire Department, not only by engines and stations, but by personnel as well. So that will be an escalated cost as we continue to add staff to be able to man those stations that are going to be able to provide service to some of the annexed areas in the city.
Councilmember Branch, and then Harrison.
Couple questions. You mentioned the General Assembly has denied this multiple times and scrutiny from state and local governments, the state and other local governments. Can you kind of explain do we know some of the reasoning of why this was denied by the General Assembly?
I may look to the city manager to help me with that because I know it's been denied on a number of occasions. Ultimately, it would be an unfunded mandate, right? Should the state pass that with no revenue source in order to make the payments. And I don't know if the city manager wants to expand on that.
So yes, basically, Allison is absolutely correct. It would be an unfunded mandate that's been passed on to all of the municipalities in the state. And although we have 100 counties, we have 500 plus municipalities. And that would be a debt obligation that some communities are not able or in the position to be able to manage. And so you may have recalled several conversations that we've had with our lobbyists wherein he has explained that the division in the two houses in the General Assembly and quite frankly trying to look out for the financial wherewithal of the entire state.
Okay. And to that, I know we just had the whole situation with vacation time, well, sick leave and
Additional
everything else. Has there been any probing of that office of how they would perceive this? Because the last thing I want is we do something to help and we lose something else.
So I don't know that they've probed on this particular item, but what we have gained from those conversations is that, number one, we need to be mindful of the decisions that we make because although it's Raleigh, it has far-reaching impact. And then number two, when you have different classes and classifications of benefits, that creates inequities across the system. And how are we as an organization going to be able to appropriately manage that?
Okay. And my last question comes a little more localized. When we talk about liability in the future and impact, what are some things, because we mentioned increasing the fire staff and getting new equipment and things of that nature, how could this impact any of that? Like, I hear it, but what is it? Are we talking delaying projects that, we already know it takes almost how many, Chief? 2 years to get a truck? 4 years to get a truck? How are those things impacted?
I think ultimately what it will impact is our bottom line, right? And at the end of the day, we'll have to make some affordability decisions at that point in time, whether or not we're going to raise taxes to be able to cover those costs, or are we going to try to operate within the confines of our existing means. And so short of knowing what comes out of that fire master plan, which will be our overarching kind of guiding document over the next year to kind of figure out how we would set up and plan for future growth. It would be we're kind of guesstimating at it, but hopefully once we get that study back, it would tell us what apparatus we need, how many employees we need, how many engines we need, how many stations we need, and all of that. And then it's our job to go back and try to plan how we phase that in so that we can meet the growing demands and needs of the community.
Okay.
Councilmember Harrison.
Yeah, thank you so much for this information. It's super helpful. I think we're having this conversation because we recognize how important our, essential employees are in the city, public safety and operating. And so having these numbers here really helps us to have the full conversation. I recognize that, our debt liability, keeping that manageable so that our credit score is good is very important because, when we have bonds for affordable housing or for parks, that allows our dollars to go further and our taxes to go further. So that's important to me. I guess I'm trying to understand a little bit around this debt liability. With the dedicated pennies that we have in our budget, is that any different? Are we taking on the same kind of liability when we say we're dedicating a penny for parks or street resurfacing?
Well, that's really the revenue coming in. And so that's actually good in the sense that we're saying we want a specific revenue allocation to go to a specific purpose. These are really kind of the other side, right, of the balance sheet, if you will. This is really that future liability and that commitment to pay and to be good stewards. We would be remiss if we didn't start setting aside some current year revenues to pay for the future. So it's definitely about, the cash payment out in the current year, but it's also about making sure we're saving for the future. So a lot of the, I'll say, current pennies go to current year operations. This is really about funding for the future.
Is it possible to structure the benefit more as a penny? So when I look at the 1 million, for example, needed in fiscal year 25, 1 out of 11, 1/11th of a penny is what would be required. Could we structure it in that way and then have that grow over time versus this debt liability on the books that hits you pretty hard at $77 million?
You certainly could take an allocation of your current revenues and dedicate it. The one thing that I would say is our salaries, and I think the city manager spoke to it at the budget presentation, the cost, our expense and salary and benefits are growing at a much faster pace than really our property tax revenues. So on average, and I know this is a revaluation year, but that's every 4 years, our property tax only grows around 2%. And yet our salaries and benefits are growing, greater than that. So I do think that, yes, you could do that. I think eventually that scale changes, and then you're not going to have enough funding in order to support a liability and separation allowance of this magnitude, especially, again, when you look at fire and ECC and operating added together. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, I think so. I am definitely thinking about our proposed tax increase and how that impacts residents that are struggling to pay their bills. So right now we have a proposal from the city to raise taxes from the county. I know, sewer and water are going up, homeowners insurance is going up. And so I'm curious, is there a metric or a benchmark that you all use to say we can only go up this much per year, based on inflation or population growth? How do we kind of think about that as a goal?
And I guess I just want to make sure that question is really around how much of a property tax increase. Yeah, I mean, I might defer to the city manager because I think with every budget, we look at what our revenue sources are and compare that to what the needs are. And at least as long as I've been at the city, those needs are always greater than what our revenue generation could be. City manager, I don't know if you'd add to that.
I think that's accurate.
Thanks.
Mayor Pro Tem?
I have general comments, but I think one question that I have for you is you made a comment earlier about, there was sort of an on-ramp for the police benefit, and for fire, if it were implemented, there would be folks who could be eligible where there's no money set aside currently. But is that something that if the city wanted to implement it, could be, I guess, delayed effective or in the future to sort of create that cadence in? Does that make sense?
Yes, you certainly could look for an option to deploy this at some date certain in the future and begin that budget allocation. Again, that would be at council's discretion in order to set a date certain in the future. I would just say if you were to do that, really part of your FY25 budget would still need a budget allocation for said purpose. So the question would be, how much would you be setting aside in 25, even if there's no one receiving that first, cash payment because there's no one yet in the program? You'd be essentially trying to put that money into the piggy bank, if you will. So then that first year, folks are eligible for the retirement separation, you'd essentially have some funding. Otherwise, if we looked at these numbers, we would need to have, based on our estimates, $1.7 million at the ready, right? Because we'd ultimately have 62 folks, and some would be effective July 1 even, right? Now, some might be December. I don't have the details in front of me. But over that current fiscal year, we would want to have $1.7 million of cash ready to make those retiree benefits. So, Councilmember Melton, I hope I answered your question.
That was helpful.
And I think just to add to that, we would still have to add that liability on the books, regardless
Absolutely.
of whatever date certain it became effective. We would still have to carry that debt and that liability on our books because there's been a council action and a commitment to it. So we've got to make sure that we've got the financial resources to stand it up.
Councilmember Harrison?
Yeah, just one more question about the actuarial study. How long would it take to do if we wanted to pursue that, and what would the cost be?
Yeah, so we looked at what our OPEB actuary costs, not our LEO. We looked at our actuary because of the larger expansion, right? I mean, you're talking about over 2,000 employees. Our estimate is, I think, between 20 and 25,000 is how much an actuarial study would cost. And my guess is it would take several months, maybe even up to 6 months. Our current actuarial studies take several months to complete. You know, there's a whole ton of demographic data that goes to the actuaries about, you know, everyone that's on staff, obviously their service dates. We also have to get any prior service that they have that counts towards credible service, which may have been for time in the military. It may have been for time at another jurisdiction that Raleigh wouldn't have. So we actually have to go to the state to request that information. And then the actuary has mortality tables and all these things that go into their analysis in order to generate the report. So that is my professional estimate of how much it would cost and the length of time.
Councilmember Jones, and then Patton.
Going back to the state, and I have a question on that. We've discussed it earlier. We have 3 cities in the state that do the separation allowance, and so that's Mebane, Kannapolis, and Gastonia. So can you help me understand how they're allowed to do it without fear? Have they been retaliated against from the General Assembly, or how is that possible?
Yeah, I don't know that I'd be able to speak to whether the General Assembly had any words of wisdom for any of those 3 entities. I believe when the analysis was done by Budget and Management Services, the tax rate in those jurisdictions was much, much higher, probably in order to begin to fund this liability. But I really can't speak to other jurisdictions.
Right, and then I have a question for Chief Griffin. If I can have him down. And as you're coming down, I just want to highlight what we talked about earlier as we're growing and we're annexing all of these different areas in the city, meaning that we're going to have to grow our personnel, we're going to have to grow our stations. How would a benefit like this attract more people to be able to have that? And then a secondary part of that question was, when was the last time we increased the number of personnel we have added to the budget for fire?
Good afternoon, Herbert Griffin, Fire Chief and Director of Emergency Management. Councilman Jones' first question is that right there alone would help the retainment of firefighters, and it'd be a recruiting tool as well. I know there's things that go along with this, there's pros and cons, but number one, you retain a lot of people because they expect and know what they're coming into when they come to this job. As it relates to additional personnel, since I've been here, I look back since 2015, we haven't increased any personnel since then. North stations.
I'm sorry, did you say 2015?
As far as I look back.
As far as
there was
you
no
look back.
additional staffing, no ma'am.
So this would be bringing in new people, which we haven't done in almost 10 years, having to attract and bring in new people that.
Well, I
need
think
to
the
add
fire
to it.
master plan would do that in
Okay.
a sense. It's going to tell you how many. Roughly, when I looked at it, we hadn't purchased a new apparatus or station, new, since 2015. As far as I look back, and that was 9 years ago. So the city has not built a new station, additional to what we have 28, or apparatus or personnel. So basically, I function off 175 people per day, right? Normally, 130 to 145 show up. The threshold, when we get to 120s on the weekends, that's when I get alarmed because after 120, I'm browning out stations, right? The summertime, I expect those numbers to dwindle down close to that. This past weekend, we were at the 135 mark. It's normally Saturdays and Sundays.
And do you think that would speak to, as we've been getting quarterly, I guess, financial updates from the budget department, I have been looking at the overtime numbers, and the fire has the largest share of overtime. Can you speak to why that would be? We're so far over what we budgeted in this current year's budget?
Well, that's attributed to many things. Vacancies are one. Unscheduled leave, we're trending about anywhere from 15 to 18% unscheduled leave, people calling off. Vacations are put in there as well, along with the military leave and things of that magnitude, FMLA. So it's a combination of things that attribute to the actual overtime.
Thank you so much for that. I just want to make a comment that something like this, and I really appreciate the financial aspect of this. I really appreciate you bringing this data. But as we are making decisions for the future and we're looking at growth and we're looking at all this, it's how are we planning for their safety, the residents' safety in the future. I'm looking at this budget. We went from 35% public safety in last year's budget, and we've gone down to 33% this year. Monetarily, that's gone up, but the promises I'm making to our residents and our staff, I don't know how to make that message pencil. So when we have these discussions of how we're going to do this in the future and how we're going to keep prioritizing public safety, it's really, in my mind, everything's going to cost money, and we have to just be able to justify it. So I really appreciate the thorough conversation that you guys have brought forward. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Yes, sir.
Councilmember Branch.
Quick question for the chief, because you mentioned something about browning out stations, and I'm trying to understand, back to Councilor Jones's point of, we're thinking about the future, we're thinking about staffing and things of that nature, and this could help with possibly retention, but you mentioned we're having to brown out stations. So Potentially, so.
If the number gets below 120.
If it gets below 120.
That's correct.
So so we staff for how many on it? You said 150?
So basically 75% of our engines in this city only run with 3 personnel.
Okay.
So that's minimum staffing. There's only 28 stations, right? 29 engines, 75% run 3 people on them. The ladder trucks, we try to staff with 4. We only have 9 ladder trucks for this city, and they're staffed fully. Potentially, we try to staff them with 5, we're at 4. Given that we have an academy class right now that started roughly 6 weeks ago, if I'm anticipating, we had 45 recruits. As of this morning, we're down to 27 or 28. It's not just here. Speaking to the chief in Rocky Mount, they're down to 1 person. They all quit. Durham is facing the same thing. They lost half their academy as well. So this is something holistic we have to look at. For me, it's reduced risk for the citizens of this city. Right? I have roughly 40 vacancies right now with 27 people in the recruit class, and they still have another 4 months to go.
Okay. All right. That's helpful.
So, Chief, just to further elaborate on that, we always give the fire department the ability to overhire, which means understanding that there's going to be some attrition that happens through that academy class, that not everybody is probably going to graduate. We're getting to kind of do that also in RPD. For whatever reasons, they don't make it through the physical portion or they don't make it through the classroom portion of the academy, but we have traditionally overhired so that in the event there will be no vacancies on the books if everybody were to make it through. So in this academy, he had about 40 vacancies. We hired 45 people, so there were 5 overhires. And I don't know what happened in the last week or so. We lost more than we knew about. That's news to me.
Actually, the overhire was 10. You gave me 10 extra.
Well, 10. Yeah. That's even worse, right? So we allowed him to hire 10 additional people. We wish that could be the case in RPD because they're really, when we look at vacancies, Raleigh Fire has the lowest vacancies in any operational department that we have in the city, quite frankly, because we have the ability to overhire. And while they're not necessarily out on the street, they're in the academy, they're a City of Raleigh employee. RPDs is a little bit different. We carry anywhere on the books from 80 to 112, 15, but that's been the case for the past 7, 8 years. I think we're probably in the best position now than we've been in probably a long time in the way of recruitment around public safety. And it's not unique to us. It's everybody in this region. If you look at it on our manager's call last week, several of the local managers are all trying to figure out what it is that we do. And I really kind of hate that Councilmember Ford isn't here today. She was going to lift up another initiative. I think that she thinks will really kind of help address some of the issues that we're having here in Raleigh Fire. And we are fully committed to making sure that we've got the appropriate staffing and equipment and apparatus and facilities. But we're going to wait for that study, or we should wait for that study to inform what we do so that we're not just putting a Band-Aid on it, that we're actually trying to stitch it up so that it takes care of the issue moving forward. And we have a roadmap of how we get there.
So just real quick, so the police have this, but yet they still have a large vacancy rate.
Oh, absolutely. They've had it since 1987.
Okay.
And it's a state mandate. I have a follow-up question because I keep
Yes, ma'am.
hearing different things. You run one academy annually?
We're up to 2 academies. We have a fast track class that's 8 weeks long and a full track. To give you some further numbers of what it takes, from the time the application process closed to the time we get them in the academy, that's 151 days. So I lose a fraction of that as well before the academy class starts. So we're actually looking at ways to be more efficient in how we deliver that by getting them on and try to keep them employed, because during the time period for CSTs and background checks, we're losing employees.
How many applicants do we get?
Last class, we had 780 people apply.
780?
780 people apply for roughly 40 vacancies.
I wish
but-
that would happen in RPD.
Me too.
It's different though, Mayor. I would say this, year 3 through 5, you look at the study of the fire service, we're losing the majority of our people through year 3 and 5. The city of Atlanta has an initiative right now where if they keep a member past 5 years, they get a lump sum payment because they feel that the American Fire Service continue these people out. To take it a step further, I looked at the female dynamics, and I think I sent this to Tansy as well. We lose the majority of our females in Raleigh Fire Department from year 1 through year 3, holistically.
What are the reasons, Gina?
I was just going to
There are
ask.
several reasons. I couldn't tell you right off the bat. A lot of them, when I read the exit reports, they're changing careers. They're not looking at this as a career anymore. The fire service is looked at as a job. Then we have to ask ourselves, what makes something a career, holistically?
So I just want to
Yes, ma'am.
follow back up to, I think, City Manager, you're saying, we were talking about how we were positioned in the best in the city in fire. But again, I want to restate that that number hasn't changed in 10 years. So if we're the best on a 2015 status, are we really the best for what we want to do for growth in the community? So my question, just to highlight, I really want to emphasize, what would this do? Would this put the Raleigh as the forefront? You know, as you're saying, other cities are losing firefighters, Durham and everything that you mentioned. Would this put us in a position where now we are the ones attracting and we can begin building that crew? Like, what does that look like for you?
Potentially, it could be a factor. I will have to see if it was put in place and the data associated with it. If it was put in place, and this is my personal perspective, I think you will have to put ramifications around that. When I say ramifications, I mean like considerations on performance evaluations, evaluations attendant people coming to work. There's ramifications. So how do you get the full benefit out of it if you put it in place? There's pros and cons to everything. Allison went through a lot, and I know the cost is associated with it. But once again, if it's something in consideration, I think you put ramifications around it to benefit the city.
Understood. Thank you so much.
Not quite yet. I have, Councilmember Fort
Yes.
has mentioned this before, based on some of the comments we've got back from people working in the department.
Yes, ma'am.
She had asked about 12-hour shifts. Have you all looked at that as a possibility for improving retention?
I have not looked at that, but I will say in my previous job, we did look at it. The city of San Antonio was performing 12-hour shifts as well. So yes, it's been looked at from my personal perspective, I have. Could it be done? Yes. It would probably take us 3 years to get that done because we would have to hire additional 175 personnel and go to a 4th shift. But yes, it could be done.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Councilmember Patton.
Yeah, I think I'll have comments in a minute, but one last question is more procedural. This is the presentation of how much it would cost is not been presented in the proposed budget. What are the possible steps from here after we make our comments? What are sort of the possible next steps? I don't know who the best person to answer it is. I'll just wait for it.
Yeah, I would assume that council could look at the proposed budget and remove something from the proposed budget in order to fund this, and/or, as it was discussed earlier at the table, consider a property tax increase.
So those are the
for
two
the funding
options. And
sources.
when would,
Those are the two.
those are the two. What are the, what's the sort of timeline on when you would need information, when you would need council direction? Sadia's like, right now, today, please.
Well, that would be ideal. Our public budget hearing is scheduled for tomorrow at 7 o'clock. So by law, we cannot adopt a budget prior to the budget, a public budget hearing. As mentioned previously, we have budget work sessions scheduled today, June 3rd, as well as June 10th, the 17th, and the 24th. So it is up to City Council to give us direction about what you want to do moving forward with the proposed budget. If you, as Allison mentioned, if you would like to, take something out of the budget to fund this, or if you would like to propose a property tax increase, that decision needs to be made at the table sooner rather than later, so that when we do bring a revised proposed budget to you all to adopt, eventually, knock on wood, prior to June 24th, that information needs to be in there.
Okay, thanks. So comments then from me, if everyone's done with questions and we're ready to pull it back to the table. So I brought this budget note forward. I believe in the sentiment and the principle of this benefit. I also think that different employees need different things, and that firefighters face different risks and challenges than other departments. And I can see why this is a useful benefit for some departments, but not all, in ways that we should be responsive to different departments and meet their needs in different ways. I also understand the heavy load that this places on the books, and that ultimately when we take on things that are expensive, we are taking those on the backs of the taxpayers. And so that should all be done thoughtfully and carefully. And already the budget that we have in front of us has a property tax increase. And as Councilmember Harrison highlighted, our residents are facing property tax increases at the county level. They're likely to see bonds on their ballot. Like their costs of living are outpacing their own wage growth. And so this is incredibly challenging. This is also the first that we're seeing this out in the open, and I would have loved an opportunity to do some deep policy work. I think there's things we could discuss about, maybe not map. I know the budget note directed to map it equivalent to LEO, so no indictment of what's been presented here, but I think we can have deep and rigorous discussion about maybe raising the age of eligibility. We know we've been offered some point of consideration that law enforcement officers tend to have a 4-year degree, sets them so they're starting their years of credible service at a later age, which impacts the sort of total time on the program. And so I think there are probably meaningful ways we could make this different. We could program it differently. I wonder if we could put in fail-safes that make it more forgiving in the bad times, right? Ways that it can be turned off. It's not exactly a pension benefit, right? If there were a year where active employees were furloughed, then this benefit would also be turned off, and in that way wouldn't exactly replicate a pension benefit. So I think there's opportunities to adjust this in a way that might make it more palatable. So I would really like to do that work. I also would like to ask staff to bring us back funding options for the actuarial study, so that we can get some real precise data on this. So it would be my thought that we direct staff to find funding sources for the actuarial study, and we send this policy to committee for further editing, tweaks, modifications, opportunities, et cetera. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Mayor Pro Tem.
I just wanted to add a few thoughts also. There's been a lot of discussion about this benefit. We're meeting with folks in the community who are in support. We've also heard the concerns of what implementation may look like. One of the concerns I've heard is equity issues. And I do respectfully disagree with that. I agree with Councilmember Patton. I do think the needs of the workforce are a bit unique and for each different worker. And we do know that firefighters have a higher risk of cancer, tend to retire earlier because of the physical strain on their bodies. And so I do think there is benefit in this policy. My main point has always been, how do we implement it? How much will it cost? Is it feasible? And I was hoping to have, like Councilmember Patton said, the ability to really deep dive on some of these figures and find a way forward. And I don't, it feels very late right now. And I'm also not entirely sure that we have, by our own admission, entirely accurate figures in front of us, because they're a bit of estimating and guessing in an informed manner with the data that we have. And so I do think that it is worth continuing, I guess, going down this road from a policy standpoint. I do agree with Councilmember Patton's points about, are there ways to be flexible? But the biggest point I agree with is I think it would be helpful to have an actual actuary look at this, because then if it really comes out to where we cannot sustain it on the backs of the taxpayers, there's, I think, some more informed data to support that position. But I'm hoping what will come back is that there may be, it's not as heavy of a lift as we think, or that there are other ways to get there. So I do think it is worth investing some more city resources in to continue this conversation, because I want to be as helpful as possible to the workforce. Hearing the chief also talk about how it could potentially be great for recruitment and retention, I think there is some merit there. And again, I do think the needs of each worker or work department can be a bit different, but I think it's probably a timing and data issue.
So let me just get this straight. Is what you're suggesting for, like, looking at this for next year's budget with more data?
Well, I mean, I think
Because
how
we
do I say this,
heard that
Decker?
an actuarial study will take at least 3 months. So I'm trying to get,
Yeah, I mean, whatever it takes, it takes. I think for me, just speaking frankly, if someone had come to us and said, hey, will you fund staff recommends funding an actuary to look at this before the preparation of the budget note, I would have supported at that time, and that didn't happen. So I think we're at a point now where I would support Councilmember Patton's suggestion that we do hire an actuary, because there has been enough work and attention done on this. It doesn't sound to me like it will cost terribly much money, and that will give us more concrete information. And if that takes 3 to 6 months, I guess it takes 3 to 6 months, but I do think it's worth doing.
Councilmember Jones?
I'd just like to throw into the mix that the fire union 548 did hire an actuary and did a study that I have the results to, that I would like to put in front of staff to just pick apart as a beginning phase to this. I know that there's a request on the table, but I do have one that I can hand over at any moment. So I can put that in the mix as well.
We have it. We received it this weekend from another council member.
Oh, you did?
Yes.
Perfect. So are you guys able to use that to base or to give any ideas off of, or what,
Yes.
pick it apart if it's wrong?
Yes.
Okay. When can we, is that something that we can have back, how soon?
I don't think it's appropriate to do it on camera, somebody speaking to somebody else's work. I think that's a conversation we can have as a team, but I do think there are some serious concerns that were raised by our finance department based on the study that was presented this weekend.
Right, and I'm not saying on camera, I'm just saying that even if it's just us on a 4x4, like I had no idea that you received that. So I would love to know, like, when could we have that discussion? Would it be in the next week, next 2 weeks, next month? Like, what does that look like?
It won't be in June, so it would probably be, well, and you guys go home early in July.
Okay, thank you.
Excuse me, please.
We already have calendared events in June, and you go home early in July, so it won't be back until after the break.
So I don't even know if that's necessary. I would say to if we're proceeding with hiring an actuary, give them the actuary study that we did receive, and it's like getting a second opinion or vetting the information. I don't know that has to be something that's, quote, picked apart. I think it's just, will you look at this? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Why? Can you expand it? What are the options? And I think that would be a good place to be. Because, I think for me, poli-sci major, I'm a lawyer, not great with numbers and math. This is a lot of moving pieces, and getting the data helps make an informed decision, and getting conflicting data is difficult to make an informed decision. And I do think that it is worth having more than sort of like our best estimate, particularly if we've been presented with an actuary study that has differing information in it.
Councilmember Harrison?
Yeah, I would appreciate and just, I guess, second or third, the need for the actuarial study, and then also using the data that has been presented by the association. And I also would like to make sure that for committee discussions, we look at any other types of benefits that might be the most impactful on retention. I think to the chief's point, there are some certain time periods when we're seeing folks leave. There may be certain demographics that are leaving. And so I would also want to investigate, where those pain points are and what is, influencing folks to go. And if there is other programs out there, for example, in Atlanta that provide a lump sum at a certain time period when we're likely to lose people, maybe that is the best way to keep folks on. I don't know. But I just want to make sure we're also looking at those other kinds of opportunities and benefits.
Yes, we are, and the Public Safety Collaborative has also raised up some other things they would like for us to look at as well.
I'm going to echo what Councilor Fort has also suggested in looking at 12-hour shifts. That could reduce the, especially for women, I mean, being home or being away 18-hour shifts, that also probably increases overtime costs.
4 hours.
Whatnot, yeah. So maybe that's something we want to look at as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we've kind of touched it all, so I'm not going to repeat everything. But I think the key is that we're looking at this still and what possibilities are out there for fire, but also I think looking at other departments, looking at our solid waste workers who are out there on those heavy trucks. And the reason why I say that is because, let's just be honest, if trash ain't picked up, fire and police got issues. So I think we got to look at that.
We all have
holistically.
issues.
Yeah, we all have issues. So that's something that I think we definitely got to look at. And I think that's where we're going at when we say operating, looking in those areas as well. Because if we're going to do something that's not mandated from the General Assembly for one subsection, we need to be holistic.
Mm-hmm. I think what Councilmember Harrison mentioned too is looking at maybe some best practices from other communities, what they're doing. If you're losing people in that 5-year time frame, what are other communities doing, and then using some of that knowledge to come back with. Councilmember Fort.
Apologize for being late, work called, but Chief, how many vacancies do you have? Where did you go? 38 total, but you got a class now, is that right? Yeah. Academy?
Yeah, we had covered this earlier. Sorry you weren't here.
That's all right, Councilmember Ford. Currently, we're sitting at roughly almost 40 vacancies right now, with an ongoing class that started with 45 and down to 27, with 4 more months to go.
Okay.
Good.
Yeah, I got it.
Okay. All right, do we have any other questions or comments? City Manager, do you have clarity in what?
No, I think I need to get clarity from the original intent for the motion from Councilmember Patton, who asked for the actuarial study. Are you asking for fire? Are you asking for fire and ECC? Or are you asking for everybody?
Good question. Good question. I did not answer that.
Can I jump in?
Can we do both somewhat in the way it's presented here, like option A, option B? Are we allowed to? Can we put that in the scope of work for the actuary?
Sure.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah, because I was going to say, if you're going to do it and you're going to pay somebody, you might as well do it for everybody, so you're not duplicating resources.
So that may stretch out the time just a little bit, but yes.
Okay. And then I think what we also heard was looking at best practices.
Yes.
And also the 12-hour shifts.
Yes. So
Okay.
we'll continue to work with the Public Safety Collaborative around some of the other benefits and clawbacks that we've done for some of the incentives that we've put in place for RPD, and just trying to make sure that the investments that we are making are being protected. And this would be one of those. And the chief had mentioned earlier that sweet spot between year 3 and 5. That's pretty much the same thing on the RPD side. So HR is currently looking at what kind of incentives we can kind of build in to be able to make it more fruitful for people to stay beyond year 5.
Okay.
But basically what we've seen with the clawback is if they go to another agency, sometime the other agency will pay it just to get them if they don't have that training cost. But trying to refine those components of that program right now.
You just mentioned something when you say if someone goes to another agency. If someone with police now goes to a different agency, does their separation go with them because it's a mandate?
Yes.
So if someone was here, if they were to leave, then it wouldn't go with them unless it's one of those 3 that already have it, correct?
Right. The separation that benefit obligation becomes at the point that you start to receive the benefit.
Yeah, that's correct. But any funding that we would have saved for said officer remains with the city.
It stays with the
Yeah,
city.
it doesn't travel to
Right.
the other jurisdiction.
Yeah.
Now, the same applies if someone
Okay.
comes over very late in their career
Yes.
that the city hasn't saved for, then we're on the hook for that as well. So it's essentially the last place that you work.
Okay. That's helpful. Thank you.
Councilmember Harrison.
Yeah, I just wanted to get a better sense of the timeline. So in terms of looking at the actuarial study, when that could come to us, getting this into a committee, what would be your expectation of when that could start? Because I just want to acknowledge, there could be changes that happen in November. I want to ensure that this conversation doesn't get dropped.
Sure. So what it would take for us is probably a couple weeks to scope it out, and then we would have to put it out to bid. So there's a turnaround time for that. And based on the fact that we're looking at both classes of employees, that's going to take a little bit longer than we would if we were just doing one department or public safety. So I think we probably want to give ourselves 6 months. We can kind of push on whomever, but this is budget season, and most of the actuaries are probably really busy right now. So I think 6 months is feasible. If we could get it before then, that would be great, but I don't want to set some unreasonable expectations, but we could get into scoping and get something scoped in a couple weeks.
Would it be worthwhile to have a committee meeting prior to the actuarial study being done to look at a variety of different programs that are out there to benefit these employees?
A committee meeting of whom?
Or it could be a work session so that everyone's part of it, perhaps. I just want to, again, make sure that we have this conversation before
I think we're talking about two different things. The separation allowance in and of itself is one type of benefit. The other benefits that might be critical to helping address some of the turnover and vacancy rates that we have in the organization, we're having those monthly conversations with the collaborative. I think what we can then do is bring back some of those recommendations to you all at a later time in a work session.
in this
And
term.
and
Okay.
you will see tomorrow some of the new leave benefits that we've kind of talked about a little bit. The HR director will be presenting those tomorrow as part of the council agenda.
Thank you.
Yeah, so let's keep those separate.
Okay.
Just
Mayor
want
Pro Tem?
To add one final thing, I just want to say I think we're making this too complicated. My preference would be to have an actuary study just for the original budget note, which would be fire and ECC. Look at what the actuaries from the association sent, use that maybe as a starting point or a vetting point. That would be my preference. I think it's getting too complicated.
Yeah, but I would go back to my
Councilmember
original
Fort.
point that I think if you're going to have a conversation, I mean, we still got other departments like solid waste and some other ones that we need to take into consideration. To me, why would you duplicate the cost if you got to do this down the road for some other departments? We could just have it all done at one time.
It's not going to make it happen any sooner. We're still looking at 3 to 6 months. So it's not like it's a matter of, oh, it's going to happen in the next 30 days. So I think in fairness, like some of the comments I've heard from other employees is, well, what about us? And if you're, it's developing into a wedge issue. So I think looking at the options would be helpful. Okay. Do we have anything else?
So let's make sure we have clear direction. We will scope out a scope of work and put it out on the streets to hire an actuarial study that will look at fire, ECC, and operating departments. And we'll have touch points as we get those touch points back from the consultant with you all to kind of let you know where we are. And to your point about November, we'll make sure that we stay in communication. And I feel certain that there'll be some other things that come forward prior to the outcome of the actuarial study that would be beneficial for employees as well.
Yeah, I think keeping us informed of ideas, like that work session, I think could be very helpful.
Yes, we can do that.
We might come up with a better idea.
I'm just confirming that the actuarial study will be funded in this budget. City manager, just confirming the actuarial study will be funded in this budget.
Yes, we'll find the money, yeah.
Yes, so we can come back at next Monday's work session and identify where the funding can come from.
When you say this budget, fiscal year 24, fiscal year 25?
24.
You're saying 24?
She said 24.
You can do it in 24, great.
Yeah.
Love it.
Okay. That's why I asked that question, because
Yeah.
I saw a difference.
Yes. For that amount, we should be able to find the money to be able to cover it so that we can get the work started. No need
Yes.
to wait until after FY '25 is adopted.
Okay. Are we finished now with?
I think I'm clear.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone, for being here. And with that, we are adjourned. See you all tomorrow.